You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. These days, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, and other social media is filled with images and video of amazing divers doing great things in spectacular parts of the world. It's almost a morning ritual for me to get out of bed to check out what other divers around the world are doing and make plans, real or otherwise, to travel to those places and share some of those amazing experiences in diving. Now, every now and again, though, an image really catches your attention and you go, what the Well, you get the point. One such image from a few months back was the expedition to Cocklebiddy Cave, Western Australia by a team of 3 divers, Stephen Fordyce, Liz Rogers and Ryan Kaczkowski. The pic was taken by Liz and features Ryan and Stephen towing a literal mountain of equipment into Cocklebiddy, and I thought, that is seriously badass. So when Brendan Moore suggested that I reach out to Ryan, I was straight on it. Ryan lives in Mt Gambier, South Australia, literally cave country for that part of the world, and cave exploration is his passion. Like most of my guests, Ryan is a super cool person, and he has some brilliant insights to share on sidemount diving, cave exploration, and what it takes to dive in these amazing places. On a personal note, I was super excited to meet up with Ryan as I have my first ever trip to Mt Gambier planned for this June. So time to learn more about Australian cave exploration with Ryan Kaczkowski on this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Ryan, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks very much, Steve.
Mate, it's awesome to finally meet you. I've seen quite a bit online, and so I'm really interested just to start things off about your background in diving, how you got started.
Yeah, sure. I suppose I never really grew up with diving or snorkeling that much in my family. Turned 16 and found out that I could get a spear gun. Thought was really cool, and that really started me off snorkeling, but it quickly progressed once I found out I could get a diving ticket. That I put the spear gun down. I wasn't really interested in that anymore, and I was 17 and I faked my dad's signature to get the diving ticket because I thought he wouldn't let me do it, and here I am.
So from that start, how did you progress from open water to where you are now?
Yeah, once I started diving, I loved wrecks. I loved diving on wrecks, the idea of seeing something that wasn't supposed to be there underwater. Yeah. And, it seemed to be following wrecks. You start going a bit deeper and doing your advanced and then your deep course. And I just thought going deep was the coolest thing ever, and that's the goal, is to go deep. And in South Australia, a lot of the ocean dives that we have here aren't deeper than 30 metres. Mm-hmm. So to get for my deep course, we had to go somewhere. And at that time, they finished off the deep course in Mt Gambier here in one of the sinkholes.
Wow.
Yeah, came down here and off I was, on a single tank, dropping down to 35 plus metres. I'd never dived freshwater. I'd never dived in a sinkhole. And I just remember seeing the instructor, he had to tie a line off to a rock and he ran the reel out to a car that we're all supposed to follow at the deepest point to remember the odometer reading as part of a narcosis test. I just saw him reeling off into the distance in this blue void. And I tell you what, from that moment, everything else to do with diving shut down, and I just knew, I had to be that guy doing that.
Yeah, pretty cool when you see the visibility, and then I guess the other thing, not having to wash your dive gear every day is good too, right?
Absolutely, and just the diving conditions, like you dive in the ocean and the boat can't go out because it's too rough, or there's a shark sighting or something or other. But in those freshwater caves, it's just you and the environment and nothing to cancel it. So I love that. Right.
So from that point that you had that first experience in a sinkhole, how did you progress on to cave diving?
Yeah, well, I had a good mate of mine who lives in Queensland now, and he'd always talked about doing his basic cave course. And after I'd done that dive, I just said to him, yep, sign us up, mate, let's do it. Booked in a ticket, came down to Mt Gambier, did the basic cave, absolutely loved it. Pretty much straight away got my dives up to go into cave. Mm-hmm. And from there, I began pretty much only diving in caves. I stopped diving in the ocean. At that time, I was a back mount single and progressed onto twins. Then eventually side mount, Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the progression into, yeah, it is natural, I guess, for cave diving. I think it's natural anyhow, but tell us about how that progression came about.
Yeah, well, one of the brother of my mate that I started diving in caves with, he was obsessed with this idea of side mount diving, and at that time, Sidemount, there weren't many Sidemount divers in the Mount. Everyone was doing the Mount. It was sort of the GUE style that everyone was sort of following at the time. And he was so keen on Sidemount. He set it up and we went diving in the ocean. He said, "You've got to try Sidemount." I had no idea why I would want to try Sidemount at that time. We weren't even squeezing in anything. And so I had my old Poseidon, horseshoe BCD, and he rigged it up for me, chucked a couple of 12 litres on and had bungeed them. And, it looked terrible. But, yeah, I started diving it like that and quickly found out that I could fit in a lot smaller places. I dived on that Sidemount BC for years before I got a proper one. And I just remember one of Grant Pierce, who's one of their very experienced divers that was based down here at the time. He looked at my setup and was just like, "What are you doing, mate?" Here, try mine. He gave me his BC to try. It was an armadillo. Yes. And straight away, an improvement immediately. And it was just, it was awesome. And so after that moment, I only dived Sidemount, and I still only dive Sidemount.
Right. I guess it's a lot like some of the rest of us. I mean, I dive Sidemount and it doesn't matter where I'm going, salt water, fresh water, whatever, and enjoy the benefits of it. And I think some of the other philosophies on that, so I using it as a tool when it's fit for purpose. My feelings on that is to be a really good Sidemount diver, you do need to build experience and build a bunch of dives on it. It's a bit more fiddly than back mount twin set DIR. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. People always talk about Sidemount, and nowadays they often see Sidemount before they even try back mount twins.
Yes.
And they're thinking, I want to go into Sidemount, and, is it harder? And, the truth is, it can be a lot fiddlier. You've got to get all those lengths right of everything. You feel like, this never-ending process of trying to make something the tiniest bit better. But I think that's in one way, that's what draws you towards it. That process, and that's, the tweaking one clip can make all the difference with your dive. Yeah. And absolutely. But I mean, the benefits of going Sidemount are, massive in comparison, in my opinion.
Yeah. I saw the video of you squeezing into Tank Cave. We're going to go there in a moment, so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but obviously that's the only way you could have got in there was in Sidemount. So,
sure.
I had an interview with Andrew Goring. I don't know if you know of him from Sump UK. This morning, which will be an episode that'll come out around this. And he makes sliding D-rings and clips and modified drop attachment points and whole harnesses. And, we talked about that at length. It is actually fun to find ways to modify and progressively improve your rigs so that, it's better.
I mean, there's always new ways coming out and how to do things.
Yeah.
And it's hard to step out of your comfort zone sometimes with, the setup that you've been using. I know I started off using the old suicide clips. And it took me ages to move away from them. I knew their advantages and disadvantages, and I was going to keep them forever. But I think as part of a good diver, you're always trying to step out of that comfort zone and willing to try new things out. They may not work, but they just might, and that change might really improve your diving, and you've got to be willing to do that. Sure.
So as we talk about that, you became a cave diver, and obviously there's a big difference between a cave diver at your level and when you're at the entry level. But let's talk about the progression from when you first became a cave diver to starting into exploration. What did you feel you needed to do in terms of skill set and experience to get there?
Exploration is a funny thing. People seem to think of it sometimes as progression. So, they do their basic cave, they do their advanced cave, and the next step is I'm going to be an explorer. And it does seem to take a certain breed of, diver to actually push forwards to being a real explorer. Yeah. Because there's a lot more involved in it than just, I've got the right gear now, or I've got the right contacts, or I've dived all the sites, now I'm going to start exploring, and I think it boils down to a few different things. I think experience, of course. The more you dive, the more you're comfortable. You can't explore if you're not comfortable with your skills and you're comfortable with your equipment, but, there's that aspect to it. But there's also a mindset, and from all of the explorers that I've been privileged enough to meet and talk to and dive, they all have this very similar mindset, and that's what makes them successful, and that's what pushes them forward into exploration. I really think that is the key. It doesn't matter how long you've been diving for or what you've done. It's what pushes you to dive is what creates an explorer.
Yeah, I've been interviewing a lot of explorers, and I feel exactly what you're saying from each of them, whether it's Jill Hyneth or Brian Kaycock or Patrick Weidman. I mean, Patrick nailed on the head. He became a cave diver to explore. It wasn't for any other reason. Once he saw that environment, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an explorer. So I think it kind of grabs you at that point.
Probably the biggest key thing, I've met a lot of divers that wanted to explore. I've met a lot of divers that have explored, but it's really the passion. It's not just, I want to go find a big passage. I mean, who wouldn't love to just rock up and notice a big giant tunnel barreling off and you explore it? But it's the desire to push past the barriers that stop you, or to gain the skills necessary so that you have them before you need them, that makes you in the right position to explore.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the barriers. So what happens as you're progressing through building that skill level and experience when you do hit a barrier? Because at some point you've got to push through that first really narrow restriction, or that first tunnel where no one's been there before and you have no idea where it's going to go and whether you're going to fit. How does that work in your mind?
Well, I think that the secret is really, is that you're comfortable where you are. Like I sort of mentioned before, about being comfortable with your equipment and comfortable with your experience, and having that muscle memory where you know what to do when things go wrong. You know that if you stick by the golden rules of cave diving, you're going to come out fine. So you know that even though you're pushing into the unknown, you're not pushing beyond what your abilities. Of course, you want to get out of the cave. So what you don't want to be doing is pushing forwards if you're feeling uncomfortable about that. So really, to get to that level, you've done all this experience, you've looked down smaller and smaller restrictions. And then once you've done that and you feel comfortable with that, then you've got this passion to know that you trust yourself and your ability, and you want to push past that restriction. You've lost some of those nerves. Yeah.
Steve Bogart's talked about having a little angel on his shoulder and a little devil on the other one. Yeah, and the devil's always trying to get him to do the wrong thing, and the angel's giving him good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love one of my favourite comments that I read in that book, Cavanaugh's Measureless Man, by Shaq Exley, and he talks about controlled paranoia. And I really think that that's such an important thing, is you're not a cowboy who's just pushing through restrictions with no worry about their own, safety like that. That doesn't make a good diver. It's about understanding the risk that you're taking and understanding the environment, and how dangerous it can be, and then choosing to act in a certain way based on that. I just like the idea of that.
Yeah, that sounds really sensible and fits in with everything that some of the other guys have told me too. So you're based in Australia, in Mt Gambier in South Australia, and for the listeners around the world who aren't aware, it's without argument one of the best cave diving areas in the world, I would say. I haven't been there yet, and I'm booked to go in June, so I can't wait. But when you cave dive in Australia, everything there is run under the auspices of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, or the CDAA, and they have a different approach to cave diving and a different approach to visitors coming. So I'm really interested in just talking a little bit about that as a member and helping everyone understand how that works, so that if they want to come visit, they know what they're up for.
Sure. Well, I suppose a little bit of the history would be that cave diving, as we know, as far as human history goes, is a relatively new sport. And when things were really starting to take off, people in Australia started getting interested in it. But around the 70s, it started to get quite popular. And down here in the Mount, we had quite a spate of accidents and deaths, unfortunately, that happened with people with their minimal training and minimal correct gear. And that was going to affect our access into these sites. And so it was either close the sites or we gain access via some proper training. And that training came with the association being formed. And creating rules with different sites and what could and couldn't be done. That's basically the beginning of the CDAA, and I suppose that's what they're about now. They're about access to the areas that we have. We're not fortunate enough to have heaps and heaps of endless sites, so we really have to protect the ones that we have. And the CDAA provides specific training, which is world recognised, but it's also specific to our region here. And so for divers coming from overseas, often they can be a little bit annoyed that they have to jump through some hoops as far as becoming a CDAA member or diving some of the CDAA controlled sites. Really, it boils down to not a distrust of the skills of the divers, but rather making sure that we protect access to the sites that we have so that people can keep coming here and diving them.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think there is a certain element of, I've done the training already, I'm cave qualified, whatever it is, why do I have to do this again? But as you say, there's caves and there's caves, and access is important, and access is not a God-given right. It's earned and paid for in many places. And I interviewed Brian Kaycock, and he has a very, very tightly controlled approach to the caves in the Bahamas and Abaco where he's at. And part of it, I'm certain, is that It isn't so much an association with him because he's kind of the only gatekeeper, but what he's got there is something that's basically unique in the entire world, and he's protecting it to make sure that it doesn't get damaged as much as anything else. I think there is something in that. And look, I'm more than happy when I come over and quite looking forward to it, actually. If nothing else, it's another chance to come over and test your skills. And also we're coming with a great group of guys. And so it's going to be really fun to go through that together. And then we're going to be doing some guided diving. So we're not even going in on our own, I don't think so. That's the way it should happen, I think, in the beginning. And then if we come back, hey, next time we get a chance to do something more.
Awesome. And I mean, that's the thing, you can dive all over the world and nearly every single cave region is completely different and they have their own sets of challenges, whether it be temperature or the formations of the cave or access, and it's about getting into a place and learning about them rather than just jumping in and going for it. And that's part of the fun of, traveling abroad and diving in different systems.
Yeah, I say the same thing about wrecks as well. I mean, you shouldn't really dive a wreck without having researched it first and understanding about it. And if you're going to enter into an overhead environment, all of these things apply. And wrecks are definitely not as controlled as caves, but the same thing applies, doesn't it? Or the same rules should apply.
Absolutely. And I suppose the other big concern down here is a lot of them are farmers that own these sites, and they allow us to access them with no financial gain for themselves a lot of the time. And they're worried if someone breaks rules or they die on their property, it really can, whether it be an emotional turmoil they go through because someone's died on their property or whether they're worried about liability. There's a whole bunch of reasons that, we need to make sure that the access protocols are followed so that once again, we can keep diving the sites. Yeah,
as I said, I can't wait. So June, here we come. So you've been involved in some amazing projects recently, and 2018 seems to be an amazing year. The one that is most recent, I think, is the new passage and fossils that you found in Tank Cave and Mt Gambier. Talk us through how that came about. I'm sure you've been diving there for many years, so to find a new passage itself is something, and then the discoveries after that is just wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been fortunate. Before I went on to advanced cave, I spent 6 years on cave level just because I was just loving the small sites. I'm not particularly concerned about large sites or pushing extreme distances and all this type of thing. If I find 10 metres of passage somewhere or I find 100 metres or I find a kilometre, it's the same feeling you get. And so I spent a lot of time in Tank Cave, which is our largest system down here in Mt Gambier. The very end of Tank Cave borders very close to a very small but pretty dive site called Fossils. And I spent a long time diving fossils, looking in little holes, looking for different ways to make the cave, extend it out. Yeah, I mean, years and years I've been diving it. And then more recently, I managed to look through a small section and had a feeling that that wasn't the bottom of the cave and there must have been something there. And over a series of numerous dives, a couple of weeks at least, I managed to squeeze myself through and found a large passage. And now that passage did eventually connect to Tank. It wasn't the direction it was going, but it did connect to Tank. So that was quite exciting and did create some access issues, but they've been sorted now. But basically that allowed me to get to the back of Tank a lot quicker and easier with less gear. And so having that advantage, I suppose, allowed me to think, well, now let's try and push some of these back areas that previously would have taken a lot of dives where I could start diving every single day, maybe even twice a day. That gave me a chance to really look at the cave and think about what was going on and where potential passage might be. And yeah, that's exactly how it sort of happened.
Tell us what you found. I mean, as you pressed the back of Tank Cave, you made some discoveries there, right?
Yeah, so the first place I went, once I connected it, was I'm going to go have a look out the back because, like I said, with the advantage of being closer with smaller gear, where everyone pushes the end of the passage, I just looked at it and it just looked like it shut down. I looked over to one side and, it just, with a different fresh eyes, I just looked and I thought, well, I don't know what it's doing, but the cave definitely continues through there through rubble. And I went back home, I had a look at the map, and I just thought, yeah, there's a chance this might go. And so I went back again, started removing the rubble that collapsed in front, and over it still took me a good week or two. I managed to find a way. It kept going and going and going, and then it popped open to this new passage, which is previously concealed. The main thing is being able to look at the cave and notice sections that are similar to other areas, which will give you a clue as to what the cave may or could do, but also noticing things like flow. Here in Mt Gambier, we don't have a lot of flow in the caves, but there is flow. But by determining which concentrations of flow are stronger and which are weaker, you get an idea of what the water's doing, where it's coming from, what it's pushing through, and that gives you little subtle hints as to, what might be in front of you as well.
Yeah, awesome. And was it Tank Cave that you found the fossils?
Yes. So at the back of Tank Cave there, I managed to pop open into this room, and now there's on the surface features, there's no features up there that show that there was another cave entrance close by. So I certainly wasn't expecting to find anything like fossils in there. But I popped into this room, and straight away I could see on the floor there was, these things that aren't supposed to be there, some spinal pieces, some very large bones. I couldn't fathom why they were there. After looking around and surveying the room, I could start to see that it must have been an original entrance, but from a long, long time ago. And as I headed up the collapse towards, hopefully a surface, I could start seeing that they were strewn all over the rocks there as well. So obviously the bodies had decomposed, and then the bones had fallen down. So there was this concentration of bones that were all from a specific time period. And that's probably the most exciting thing about it, was that at some point this was open to outside. We're talking 40,000 odd years ago, the experts say. But then at some point it was closed off, and it hasn't been contaminated by, species that we have today. It is just this window into the past that was open, allowed things, and then closed. So, and that's why it's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that part of the cave's been closed off while the scientists get in there and have a look at what has been discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I took photos of the bones just to identify what they were and what time era. And straight away, we were in contact with the paleontologist who is part of our association here. And straight away, he recognised the significance of them. And basically, there's put in motion some grants so that hopefully in the future we can remove this collection of bones. There's a lot of bones in there. And then study them and find out what species they belong to. So that's something that will happen in the future. For the time being, there's been restricted access to it just so we don't contaminate the area, which will give us the best chance to really study, what's in there.
Yeah, and that's quite amazing. I mean, it's one thing to find new passage, but then to find things in there from such a long time ago, that's just stellar.
Absolutely. I mean, it was certainly a bonus for me. I'd still love to go in there and push the exploration, but at the moment I'm being careful because a lot of these bones are in the way of further exploration. It's a bit of a juggling act at the moment for me. My prime interest is exploration. So, the bones, like I said, are a bonus, but it's something that I'm dealing with at the moment. I'm hoping to find a dry chamber above, which may contain full skeletal remains. And that would be my ideal at the moment.
So at the moment the cave goes up and you're thinking it'll go to a dry chamber that used to go to some sort of entry exit.
Yeah, look, like I said, the bones are all sort of scattered and random because the entrance, obviously they're just filtered down through holes. So there's no big lake up there that I can just emerge to and look around a bit. But I have managed to get to the surface through some pretty gnarly restrictions. And at this stage, I can get my shoulder and my hand out into the dry section. And I'm making it a little bit larger for myself by moving rocks, hopefully to the point where I can get my head and shoulders out. And once I get to that stage, I'll be able to choose which rocks I can move and start looking for that void, which I'm sure is there. Once I find that void, I've got no doubt there'll be something quite exciting to find in that.
The future holds some awesome prospects. Now, as well as that, you were doing some diving in Cocklebiddy in Western Australia that I saw that involved a massive amount of movement of equipment. And I think I saw there was only 3 of you involved in that. So I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, with Cocklebiddy, a year or so before I started diving Cocklebiddy, because I'd always sort of put it on the to-do list when I was retired. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. And I could hold on to a scooter and go to the back. I never really had much interest in going there. And it had been looked at by a lot of people, so I wasn't too excited about the exploratory potential. But a few years before I started diving, I was fortunate enough to be invited to dive on a Panakin Plains trip, which had been only allowed access to relatively few divers at that stage and had been pushed quite hard, but nothing had been really found out the back, at least anyway. On my first trip out there, I managed to find a large dry chamber, which is the second dry chamber, and a subsequent third sump. And it got me thinking that, not that I'd done anything special, but just with a fresh set of eyes and different gear. I had a Sidemount breather at the time, which I think was a strong contributor to what I found. It made me think, well, maybe I should start revisiting some of these other sites. So I went and dived Cocklebiddy. I dived it a couple of times and straight away realised that when you're at the back of a long cave system like that and you're going over so many dry chambers and you're carting so much gear, you're really not in the headspace to be making proper effort of exploring. And so I talked to my mate Steve Fordyce and about the potential of camping in that last dry chamber. And if we did it, doing it properly, staying for an extended period of time, we need, we need to use the scooters, so we need battery power. We need to be able to boost up O2. We need everything in there. And if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly. I wanted to steer clear of these really large groups, whereas I find with smaller groups you can have more success with dedicated people. And we came up with the idea of it. And so Steve got to work. He's an engineer by trade, and he does amazing things. He is an inventor, basically. And so he came up with the idea of this sled, which we could cart copious amounts of gear, and started coming up with the logistics of it. We came up with a battery system so that we could recharge anything we needed. We'd have tons of power for all of our scooters, and basically organise all those logistics. And, that was the birth of the Cocklebiddy trip, I suppose.
That sounds amazing. This sled, I'm assuming it could be made neutrally buoyant, and you're saying it had a power supply, and I'm assuming some sort of redundant power supply on it. And is that what it was?
Yeah, well, basically, the previous sleds before had been frames, all types of things which are painful to cut. So Steve's idea was basically to make something which could be broken down, easily portable, had its own buoyancy. And so basically using a series of PVC tubes, which can become obviously floodable chambers. You can float it, you can attach everything you want to it. And then once you've attached everything, then you can control that buoyancy to make it neutral. So whether it's really heavy or really light, you can flood the chambers, and there's separate chambers in it for that. Sort of like the Titanic, I suppose, in reverse. And,
or a submarine, probably more accurate, right?
yeah, exactly. And then we had obviously another inflation vest, basically, that dealt with, because obviously once you go deeper, you've got neoprene that's getting crushed and different things like that. So we had that as another secondary type of buoyancy. So it was well thought out. And I mean, there were teething problems. These type of things always do funny things when you're just trying them out, even, from salt to fresh. But overall, it managed to work, and it worked really successfully. We camped in there for 5 days, and realistically, we were in complete luxury. We were watching movies.
Yes.
I had a carton of beer, so I was very happy. We could boost, we could charge everything. We had chairs. We were sleeping great. So, best mindset for exploration.
Excuse my ignorance of sumps and dry passages, but I'm assuming this is at 1 atmosphere in the dry passage? Yeah. It's open to the atmosphere somewhere.
Yeah, whether it be through filtering through the rocks. It's certainly different temperature down there. It's a constant temperature, but it's 100% humidity. As soon as you start moving, you start sweating. So, and it plays all sorts of havocs on the electronics, sleeping, everything. It changed the logistics of everything, but there's no decompression obligations or anything like that over a long period of time.
Yeah, very cool. So 2 great projects in 2018. What have you got planned for this year?
I've got some projects that I'd really like to revisit. I've got some trips planned. Harry and Craig are hopefully going to be joining us on a trip that we're doing up north to look at an area that we've previously visited that has multiple sites. None of them seem to definitely finish at this stage, and they're all dropping down to around about the 50 to 60 metre depth.
Right.
So looking forward to that. Also, I love Walgan, the cave system, on the Roe Plains there in the Nullarbor, and I'm always planning trips back there. That's a cave that just keeps on giving, in my opinion, it's the best cave dive in Australia that everyone should have on the list to do, purely because of its size. It's still fresh and new. If you want to run line, you can still go there and go places no one's been before, like it should be on everyone's. So it will certainly be on mine.
And how do you get there? I'm visualising Australia now in a 24-hour drive in a car over bumpy roads. Is it like that?
You're pretty close. It certainly is. So from Mt Gambier, it's a 20 to 24-hour drive, which I normally do straight because I'm too excited. I'll stop on the way back home. Most of the dive sites on the Nullarbor are high up in the escarpment, so you've got a lot of vertical access issues, whereas because of Walgan's on the Roe Plains, now things have changed, but you drive bitumen most of the way, so about 20 hours on the bitumen. Then you've got about an hour or 2 hours of driving on sort of like sandy dirt roads, which bumps around, and you're only doing about 20 or 30 kilometres per hour, which is quite painful. And it used to be a 3-kilometre walk then from the campsite to the dive site with wheelbarrows with all your gear, but now it's pretty luxurious. We can drive almost right up to the hole. There's a beautiful campsite there, and you lower your stuff pretty much down 5 metres straight into the water in lovely shade.
I think you've described a Steve dive site now, so.
Well, you're going to love it, mate, so make sure you put it on your list.
Yeah, mate, that might have to be next year, but we'll get ourselves going in Australia first and then have a look at that next. And do you get much of a chance to dive overseas as well, or is it mainly in Australia?
Look, I haven't had much chance to do many tourist things. I've done a fair bit of diving on projects with dive mates in West Timor.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to explore a lot of different cave systems there that were connecting villages, actually, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And I've done a few dives, in New Zealand, bits and pieces. But to tell you the truth, I love the look of diving overseas, but there's so much here in our own backyard.
Yeah.
And, my principal passion for diving is exploration. And what better place to do it than in your own backyard where you're on home ground? I leave that stuff to the guys that live over there. But for me, I've got the advantage of being able to, jump in my car and drive for one day, and I'm out in the Nullarbor, in these remote places. For the time being, while I've got that energy and enthusiasm and passion for it, I'm going to stick with our local stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, living right in Mt Gambier, so you've got caves on your doorstep, and then also the ability to travel within a day's drive, whether it be Western Australia or the Nullarbor, you've got more caves. So sounds amazing.
Yeah, and cave diving is such a relatively new thing in Australia that there's so much potential here for the guys that want to visit these places and want to gain the skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's just awesome. And Mt Gambier really is the place to come to get those skills and develop your desire and your passion for diving, and then to take them further.
Yeah. Now I'm asking for myself. So for my trip and coming up in June, Tank Cave is obviously on the list. Where else should we look to dive?
Oh, look, one of the best things about Mt Gambier is that for such a small region, there's just so many different sites. So you've got, your large, huge, ginormous sinkholes, which go 100 plus meters deep. You've got your really beautiful, pretty sites like Piccaninny Ponds, where there's a lot of underwater fauna there that you can enjoy. There's also your long cave systems like Tank Cave, which is obviously a large one that draws most people. So you really just have a range of sites. So whether you're interested in, a bit of exploration, or whether you're interested in longer dives, or whether you're interested in photography, it really has quite a variety of things that you can come and visit and try and, keep mixing it up. Some of our more famous sites, the Shaft, which is entered by a tiny hole in the middle of a farming paddock, is a favourite. With crystal clear water, and it's the size of a football field. Once you drop in, it really leaves lasting memories. Killsby's obviously is one of the famous sites down here that everyone now has an opportunity to dive, even on a basic open water license. Yeah, and then Tank Cave, they're definitely some of the top ones.
Well, I've taken a heap of your time, Ryan, and I'm really appreciative. And thanks for giving us an insight into both the discoveries that you've made last year and also what it takes to be a cave explorer. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of that, and I certainly have, and I can't wait to come meet you in person in June, and we'll go for a dive and see what there is to have in Mt Gambier. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat. It's been great. Oh, you're welcome, mate. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.